Welcome back to Psychedelic Therapy Frontiers, the podcast devoted to exploring the frontiers of psychedelic medicine and what it takes to cultivate a healthy mind, body, and spirit. As always, Psychedelic Therapy Frontiers is brought to you by Numinus. I'm Dr. Steve Thayer, and today my co-host, Dr. Reid Robison, and I explore a few of our favorite tools and concepts for promoting and maintaining good mental hygiene. We discuss Dr. Phil Stutz's book, The Tools, top-down versus bottom-up strategies, psychological multiplicity, self-compassion, self-discipline, mindfulness, some helpful metaphors, leaning into discomfort, the power of using the breath as a tool, how tools can become traps, and much, much more. A few announcements before we get into the episode. Numinus Training has an upcoming course in July, if you're listening to this episode when it's released, July 2024, on psychedelic harm reduction and integration. I'd highly recommend this introductory course to get an overview of how to begin supporting clients in this work and building a career in this space. It's only 10 hours long, and you get great opportunities to discuss how providers are currently offering support to folks that are seeking psychedelic experiences or returning from one and want to make a meaningful or lasting change. This course is also a great opportunity to network and build connections with other like-minded folks working in the psychedelic therapy space. You can click on the link in the show notes or go directly to numinus.com/training, and you can use the code PTF10 for 10% off. If you've listened to the show for a while, you have likely heard Reid and I discuss a clinical trial or two. If you're curious about the clinical trial work that Numinus does, you can click on the link in the show notes or go directly to numinus.com/research. If you'd like to support our show, you can do so by leaving us a rating or review in places like Apple Podcasts or Spotify. If you're watching on YouTube, go ahead and like the video, subscribe to the channel, maybe even share the episode with somebody you think might benefit from it. Without further ado, here is today's episode on helpful tools for good mental hygiene. And we're back. Another episode of Psychedelic Therapy Frontiers. How you doing, Reid?
I'm doing well. Thanks, Steve. How are you?
I'm also doing well.
What does that even mean?
I don't know.
Well.
Well, I used to say...
How are you really?
If I ever said I was doing good, my English professor father would say, "You're doing well, Stephen." Like, oh, sorry about that. Yes, I'm doing well.
Yeah. But what's underneath the hood of that doing well?
You know, I'm a little tired because it's the end of the day. Then when we're recording this, I had a busy morning teaching one of our fundamentals of psychedelic-assisted therapy courses. It's the last the last module of this cohort.
Yeah.
We talked about therapist self-care, talked about burnout, and it actually, as I'm thinking out loud about it, is pretty apropos for the topic we're going to discuss today. But you ran across an interesting recent survey of people in psychedelic use.
I thought this might be of interest to share a tidbit or two from, because have you heard of the RAND Corporation?
Yeah.
Big survey group. They did a survey of drug use in America. I think it was late last year, but the results are in, and I thought it might be interesting to look at what percentage of Americans from this sample use different things like alcohol, cannabis, and psychedelics. But so lifetime and past year, but basically they surveyed like 3,000 or 4,000 American adults. And what's your guess on percent of Americans in the last year who have used alcohol?
80.
Yeah, nice guess. 86%.
Oh, okay.
How about cannabis?
Ooh, 50?
Yep, 56%.
Hey.
And Steve's not even cheating here.
I have not seen this.
Okay, I won't, since you're on a roll, I won't push your luck on these subtle ones.
Okay.
But what I found interesting was lifetime use of psychedelics. Psilocybin and LSD were about the same, surprisingly. But I think this represents some historic use of LSD by maybe some people in the sample. Because in the past, so psilocybin and LSD lifetime use were 12% both.
Oh, interesting.
And in the past year, it was like 3% for psilocybin, 1% for LSD, and like 0.75% for, no, it was also 1% for MDMA.
Oh, I'm curious about the not that you have this, but the demographics of the data set. Like, is this age stratified? I wonder region. Even SES, like that, those would be interesting.
Yeah. We'll have to dissect the report because I just have a table summary in front of me, but I have the same question. As soon as I saw that American adults, I immediately said, well, it answers the question of, this is not teens we're talking about, but it also wasn't a geriatric specific survey. Yeah.
People holdover from the 60s. Yeah.
Yeah. How rampant is psilocybin use in nursing homes these days?
Yeah, I mean, it tracks with what at least I've heard in conversation that as the stigma reduces, people get curious about the therapeutic use, but also just cognitive liberty, that they're more willing to experiment with plant medicines and related compounds.
And interestingly, for psilocybin in the past year anyway, those who reported use, about half of them said it was a microdose. Oh. Whatever that means,
whatever they mean by microdose.
Yeah. There are a lot of varieties of the microdose experience, if it's an experience, right?
Indeed.
Yeah.
Yeah. Psychedelics.
You're on to something.
Trademark. Psychedelics, interesting tools. For our topic today, though, we thought we'd talk more generally about useful mental health tools or things that you can do to conduct a little psychological maintenance or hygiene. My mom used to use that phrase, good mental hygiene, which I thought was an interesting way of thinking about it.
I like that term, mental hygiene.
Yeah.
Mental flossing.
It's a good blog called Mental Floss, actually.
Yeah. I was remembering that as the words came out of my mouth.
Yeah. So, of course, if you've listened to our show for any amount of time, you've heard us talk a lot, if maybe even every episode.
Maybe too much.
About mental health tools, psychological tools. We kind of can't help it. We're both mental health professionals, but we also receive feedback from our listeners that they like those things, that they find it useful for their own personal lives, and the professionals, mental health professionals that listen to our show also like it when we either expose them to tools that they don't use or we get it wrong. We talk about tools that they use in their practice all the time, and we betray our ignorance, but we've decided to be extra vulnerable and just talk about some tools that we like to use and ones that maybe I'm not as deft with that I'd like to learn more about.
Yeah, and this is not a comprehensive list, but more of a random sampling from our brains in the moment.
Well, when you first pitched this topic to me, the word tools made us think of Phil Stutz's book, The Tools.
Yeah.
And I remember when I was first exposed to that book, so Phil Stutz, this sort of famous, he's a psychiatrist, isn't he?
Psychologist, I think. Wait, I have a quote by him. Let's see if his initials are next to
Dr. Phil Stutz, but I think he also co-authored that book, The Tools. He was sort of the mental health provider to the stars. I'm thinking of certain stars like Ron Perlman talked about his work with Phil Stutz.
There's a Netflix.
Yeah, who produced that one?
Jamie, what's his name? The celebrity.
Jonah Hill.
Jonah Hill, yes.
Jonah Hill.
I could see him, but...
Yeah. Hank Azaria, who voiced a lot of the Simpsons voices, he's seen Phil Stutz.
Yeah, and he's good. Like if you read his work, there are a lot of unexciting self-help books out there, or regurgitated stuff.
Yeah.
But I've kind of processed and digested some of myself, but I've also seen this in a lot of colleagues who have thought, okay, that's a solid tool, or like a great expression of a solid practice. Yeah.
Yeah, I like the way you said that, because I remember when I first read the book, a client of mine actually shared it with me. He said these tools were really, really helpful for him. And I remember reading it and thinking, there's nothing revolutionary here. It's not like Stutz invented these concepts or even these tools. He just distilled them down into very practical instructions, very encouraging about their potency and simple ways of deploying the tools, I feel like.
Yeah. Maybe it would help to categorize some of these tools. I'm thinking of a 2x2 matrix in my mind, but no, thinking of two different categories of like mind and body tools, top down, bottom up tools, if you will, and both have their uses, and we could talk about, but also ones that are kind of more preventive and ones that are more of an intervention.
Oh, okay.
And sometimes there's overlap there.
Yeah.
Like you could cold plunge as a practice, and you could cold plunge during an emergency panic. Yeah,
exactly.
As a reboot or whatever. But
I like that.
But yeah, like top down, being your thoughts, starting with your thoughts and cognition. I'm thinking CBT. I think you even brought in a mindfulness-based CBT workbook of exercises. But yeah.
Yeah, and a lot of the therapies that people might have received are certainly come from that top-down vantage point. CBT being one of the more, at least in this third wave phase, research psychotherapies, has a lot of good data behind it. It also lends itself probably a little bit better to the scientific method than something like somatic experiencing or even EMDR. But acceptance and commitment therapy, combining mindfulness and cognitive-based principles. There are a lot of tools in ACT that Steve Hayes puts together, usually used through deliberate practices, but also metaphor. I remember first studying ACT in graduate school and just loving the collection of metaphors that he used.
Yeah, he's a master of metaphor and useful ways, like passengers on a bus.
Yeah, the bus driver
metaphor. And so we don't tease with that. It's basically a way to look at, say, your monkey mind or your parts, or as passengers on the bus, and remember that you're in the driver's seat, essentially, as a super quick.
Yeah, it's a way to de-identify with thoughts, right? We've talked about it before, but one theory is that a lot of our suffering, and this jives with sort of mindfulness-based attitudes, but that a lot of our suffering comes from thinking that we are our thoughts, over-identification with thinking.
Yeah.
And we torture ourselves with thoughts, not knowing that these are editable, right? That we don't have to believe everything that emerges into our conscious field. And they might be the result of conditioning. They might be the result of, early childhood experiences, culture, society, the interplay of nature and nurture. But just because we have them doesn't mean we have to believe them. So these metaphors and these strategies are designed to help bring that into awareness. Like, I'm having the thought that I'm a piece of garbage.
So I'm curious, because that has been such a useful tool for me, and I'm getting ahead of the tool, but to get to a perspective shift for me and slip back into the driver's seat has been immensely helpful over the past year. I'm wondering, how do you make that little flip in your day-to-day life or with your clients?
Yeah, I've arrived at that from a lot of different angles in my life and professionally with my clients. I've talked about it a lot recently, in part because I'm signed up to get level 1 certified with IFS, but the concept of internal parts and multiplicity, the symphony of selves, like Fadiman might say, has been really, really helpful for me to bring that into awareness and to extend self-compassion to myself, which has historically for me been difficult to do. So if I'm having a particularly self-critical thought, I used to, from a sort of a mindfulness or ACT-based perspective, just sort of realize, okay, I'm feeling kind of bad about myself. Are these thoughts true? Do sort of your typical CBT interrogation of that thought. What's the evidence for that thought? Is there contrary evidence?
Challenging that part,
right.
in a friendly debate, perhaps.
Yeah, so letting go of the debate aspect has been helpful. Instead of, in like sort of the IFS perspective, this is a part of me that's doing this right now for good reason. So what's the reason? What are they protecting me from? What are they trying to spare me from?
Yeah.
And so taking a step back and sort of seeing that part and then visualizing that part, this is what helps for me as a younger version of myself, helps me be more compassionate. So like, oh, this is 6-year-old me who is just trying to get noticed and loved and develop this perfectionism. Maybe if I perfected myself, I would get the love that I craved. And he's not updated on sort of adult perspective, Steve, that knows, at least at the top of my consciousness, that I don't have to be perfect to be loved, that I actually have a lot of people in my life that love me because of my imperfections, in spite of my imperfections. So holding that part of me, like I even shared this story once in the podcast, but I would physically pat my chest as if I was holding my 7-year-old self and comforting him from the perspective of this more mature version of me or part of me, or what Schwartz might call the capital S self. And finding that I don't have to force that belief into the cellar, or I don't have to burn it away. It can live in my system. It just doesn't have to be the driver of the bus, to borrow the metaphor we talked about earlier.
I think that's the beautiful realization, is that when you do de-identify with that kind of out of control part or whatever, it's amazing what happens if you slip into the driver's seat, that you can actually steer the bus and you can shift your attention to something else.
Yeah. And one of the things that's been really helpful for my clients is it takes off the table this idea of fixing oneself, like the idea that they're broken. I had a client just in the throes of that pain the other day, I'm broken. There's nothing I can do to fix myself. I've tried so many things to fix myself, but I still do the same stupid stuff. I still defeat myself in all these ways. Yeah,
if you think about couples work or family therapy, and how, a lot of the work in couples work is in putting out these fuses so you can actually, with regulated nervous systems, have a dialogue or remember the love and compassion as a foundation before you engage. Otherwise, it's just terribly unproductive. And I think the same applies internally. Think of family therapy sessions gone wild, where buttons are pushed, people flying off the handle, you're getting zero work done.
Right.
And the same applies inside. I view these parts as my sacred companions through the journey of life. And the more lovingly and gently I can communicate and the more I can listen, the better.
Yeah. And I should say I don't always do this. Like sometimes I am totally taken over by a part, if we're going to keep using that language.
Stuff.
Definitely still human.
Yeah. It's interesting to look at the different chapters of being human too. And not even in a predictable way. I just remember doing some specific trigger work, trying to find where I'd been activated, what are my vulnerabilities in a time, maybe a year or two ago, where it was just a different inner landscape. Things were almost too peachy keen or peaceful. But, these days, for whatever reason, I don't have the answers to that, or there's just a lot more to work on or a lot more coming up. And, but I'm thankful for practicing the tools along the way, and gaining more of them year after year because I need them desperately. I did more than I thought I would.
Yeah. It gives me confidence to sort of grapple with what you can't possibly predict.
Gets you out of helplessness.
Yeah.
It gives you you're going into something with a tool, a tool for the situation instead of trying to take that screw off with your hand or whatever.
Right.
But you do have to try them on. I'll admit that, as an example, one of my tools that I've probably talked about on here more than people care to hear is like yoga practice, but that encompasses many tools for me but I totally realize that it's not for everyone. The yoga practice or tool that I did, before coming here today was, if I hadn't been doing it regularly, it would be pretty counterproductive. I would be wrecked, and if I have to be aware of that, because I go into this kind of get on my yoga mat in a very hot room and do some really challenging things. So everything's coming up from every angle, like the monkey mind and the sweat dripping down my head and the urge to wipe it off, or the physiologic response to flee or seek comfort, avoid discomfort, avoid pain. We're so wired for that. And then just using my breath through all that stuff, day after day. And I don't expect that to work for most people. Everyone's got to find their own tools, and we're kind of laying them out there, sharing our favorite varieties. But there are common themes in these. I think the theme there is that I go in on purpose and get uncomfortable and breathe and come out on the other side with some skill and confidence.
Yeah. So going in there on purpose, this is related to a theme that we've talked about a lot, and you and I discussed even before we hit record, and that is approaching discomfort.
Yeah.
And maybe that's bottom up. There's some top down involved there as well. But you see this a lot in trauma treatment, where the trauma is sort of locked in the nervous system in one way or another. And before we can heal it, before that process can be completed, we have to be able to quote unquote, hold space for it. And what does that look like practically? It might look like, you're in a therapy session, maybe a psychedelic therapy session, and you notice tightness in your chest. And maybe historically you would have just, gotten lost in thought or done something to not feel that. But instead we approach it with resources, so we're not totally overwhelmed, and allow ourselves to just pay attention to the tightness in our chest and see what comes up, see if it changes. Maybe we even try to intensify it, or maybe we try to breathe deeply,
blow it up,
and see what happens if we deflate it, right? Or if you get tightness in, let's say, your hands, like, why don't you just go ahead and clench those hands? What would happen if you just slowed it down, right? Gently opened those hands? What would you notice? Again, we're not trying to fix or do anything deliberately here, apart from attend to, move toward it when our impulse would have been to move away from it.
Yeah, that's I think a common theme of something I'm working on, and probably always am working on, is just being with or sitting with, observing. Like even when emotions come, like we're talking about tools, and this brings up a bit of a, I think, important preface, is that, the tools aren't there to use as an escape, or as Ram Dass says, all tools can become traps. And I remember that every day as I use lots of different tools, because I just want to check in on, am I feeling the emotions that need to be felt, even if they're uncomfortable? Am I running from, the moment by some of these tools because there's uncomfortable stuff in it?
Right.
And balancing that, it's this middle path right through that of, and yes, emotions do rise and fall rather quickly, even the difficult ones, if we let them. And we do get to choose our next step forward, and there are all sorts of emotions associated with those steps, and you can shift into a positive light. But I remind myself every day to feel the negative stuff too.
Yeah. Let yourself feel it. I like this metaphor of a tool, and it can become a trap. Like, you think of a hammer. A hammer can be used to drive a nail. You can also shatter a window with a hammer. Yeah. So the tool appropriately deployed with the appropriate intention in the appropriate context can be everything.
So, awareness, and then also being gentle with yourself. That's something I try to remind myself. In fact, even after this yoga class this morning, I was overheated, and I'm like, I don't want to be beat red when I record a podcast with Steve. And one of the things I often like to do is just like take a cold shower after. And as I'm sitting there about to turn on the cold shower, and my cold plunge at home is broken, has been for almost fixed, but it's been out of commission, so I'm exposed without my daily tools. So I'm sitting there like, and then something comes up of like, oh, maybe you don't need to, and I bring this up because I can either force myself in, which I'm trying not to do, or just like, oh, that's cute, and be with that for a second, and then make sure, because I don't want to over frazzle my nervous system. I want to expand its capacity. But there is a window of tolerance, and I don't want to beat myself up or into the ground. I just took a moment, and this is probably a few seconds, right?
Yeah.
A lot could happen in our subconscious or a conscious mind, and then just proceeded and had a lovely awakening through cold water.
This is a really interesting example, Reid, because, earlier in my life when I was thinking about personal development, it was a lot of it revolved around self-discipline.
Yeah.
And discipline came in sort of, discipline looked like conquering oneself.
Yeah.
So in the cold shower example, it would be like, come on, don't be weak. Don't be a wuss. Just power through it. Do it.
Yeah.
I'm hearing you talk more gently with yourself. But it sort of arriving at, I don't know if the same destination, you're still, maybe it's the difference between self-control and versus being skillfully yourself.
Yeah, I think it's just inserting that loving awareness into the equation towards yourself, or that like compassion along the way. Because I'm thinking about that. If I really want to jump off a cliff into a lake, but it's scary, I could stand on the edge of that cliff being gentle with myself forever and never jump.
Come on, buddy. You can do it.
And so it's just a really interesting thing for me. And the only answer I've been able to arrive at is, we have this intuitive machinery inside ourselves, and check in with it, like connect and be dialed in with it, so you can know when you know how much you can push without traumatizing yourself, if you will. Yeah. And because sometimes you do need to give yourself a gentle kick in the pants. But there is this reflexive inner dialogue, like culturally, evolutionarily, and I notice it come up in me on a regular basis of like that dialogue, like you're describing, like just effing do it, right? Like I catch myself in that all the time, and I think the key is just seeing that, just being aware of it, and be like, oh, there it is. Yeah.
Yeah. And maybe where it comes from matters, right? If just effing do it is, come on, man, do it. Like there's strength and there's an immediacy to it versus, do it in a scolding kind of way or a shaming kind of way. I think that makes all the difference. And
to follow on your parts work tool here, I think the 8 C's that help us determine how much self energy is on board, or how much are we embodying our capital S self in a given moment. Like, is there some degree of calmness? Is there curiosity about this? Is there confidence that I can actually step into this, et cetera, et cetera? And you're not going to have all of them. And I'm just looking for, a few of these key things, be like, ding, ding, like, we're going for it. And as an example of how I might walk that line of pushing myself without being mean to myself.
There you go. Yeah. You mentioned the breath. Maybe we could talk a bit about that tool, right? We heard the breath called the remote control for the central nervous system. It's one of those
I like that
few
analogy.
processes that both happens automatically. We also have voluntary control over. I can't, at least I'm not, I don't know if I could, like, willfully will my heart to beat at a certain rate or rhythm. Something that I know maybe some people can do. But
some can, but interestingly, every time you inhale, it speeds up a little bit. And every time you exhale, it happens for everyone. So you bring up 2 interesting kind of interconnected examples is, yes, the diaphragm is in much more of our conscious control than the heart. You can tune into and exert influence over a lot of these systems. I haven't tapped into my pancreas yet, but I mean, I don't doubt that you could, in theory, get some insulin going on demand with your thought patterns. I know, like, there's research that touches into that.
Right, indirectly, right? But the breath is this tool that we have sort of direct access to.
Yeah.
And we've talked about it as a tool or a resource during psychedelic work, right? But certainly as a place to focus when you're doing mindfulness meditation, an anchor to return to put you back in the present. But also certain breathing exercises to, as you stated with the heart rate, like literally put yourself into parasympathetic tone to slow things down, and everything follows suit.
Yeah. So in this yoga class, for example, there were a few instances of me just pausing and trying to do long, slow breaths with long exhales, to slow down my heart rate that was getting up to like 150 plus beats a minute or whatever. Right. And it's interesting. You could change your breath in a second. Like, sometimes it's hard if you're huffing and puffing, but the heart kind of follows suit, and in maybe less of a rapid way or less of that conscious influence, but it's all interrelated, and that is certainly a tried and tested tool for me. A lot of different flavors of using the breath, but one of them would just be like, take some deep breaths, letting your belly rise and fall with them, and really make sure your exhales at least match the inhales.
Yeah. You've been actually an inspiration for me around breath. Like, we've been sitting together, like in cold water breathing, and you're doing a breath hold, and my breath gives out after 20 seconds, and you're just over there like a freaking statue, holding your breath forever. But there seems to be some utility in like finding that edge where your body's saying, oh no, you're going to suffocate and die. But knowing you actually have a ton more if you can just ride the wave of discomfort. And this is something physiologically you can train. But
yeah, and it comes and goes for me. Like, I'll I'll admit it, kind of like I was talking about in some chapters of life, things are peachy keen or less put to the test. And other times, like I remember having to, maybe a couple years ago, having to put some practice into that because like I noticed even some of that inner critic being like, come on, Reid, like what the hell's going on with your breath hold? Yeah. But, I had another thought, but it'll come back to me in a moment.
Super breath hold.
Yeah. Yeah. So breath, though, it is one of my, on a good morning, and I'll admit I don't do this every morning, but this is something I got from some kind of yoga training years and years ago, was like pranayama in the morning. There's even one flavor called a yogic cup of joe. Like there are different ones, and I'll just usually take a few, like Bastrika, if you're familiar, or bellows breath, things like that. But we'll just do 2 or 3 rounds of, say, 20 breaths on a few different things, sitting there before I get up and go for the day. And that really sets a tone for how I'm feeling, or helps me get out of a morning fog. And I just noticed, because I've not done it plenty of times, that, I've done my own double blind comparison, only single blind.
Yeah, it's also a testament to what you were saying earlier about just different tools for maybe different seasons, and we can fall out of habit or love with one tool and into habit or love with another.
But I do feel like calm, like they say calm's a superpower or whatever, like to be able to cultivate the ability to weather an intense storm is it's been a passionate pursuit of mine for years. And I think like I do work on this on a daily basis. Like if we're talking about those intense yoga practices, like in an hour a day of like pushing certain physiologic buttons. But I remember I was on a family trip to Mexico. I think it was it was 1 or 2 years ago. We were in Puerto Vallarta. Have you ever been like ziplining out that direction in the jungle? But you take these, like, my kids called them the battle bus. It was like a fortnight battle bus going up the jungle. And then you ride donkeys to get up to the zip line in the jungle. And then these are crazy. It was super fun. And push some buttons of some of the kids, like my parents' grandkids, some of my kids' cousins, like facing their fears by rappelling down a waterfall or something, and then just like having a rush of tears after come up. It was really neat. But as I'm like trying to rally the troops back onto the battle bus and make sure my kids and others are still accounted for, I left my phone behind. And so like in another country, leaving your phone behind in the jungle could trigger some feelings of panic, right? But it was pretty neat that I just felt entirely unfazed through it, and just rode that and like calmly shared that with others on the bus, and they're starting to panic for me. I'm like, okay, no, we got this. And then like towards the end of this long, like 45 minutes later, this other battle bus is coming up honking, they're waving. We're like, what is going on? There's a situation. They're waving a phone out the window. Yeah, it was pretty cool.
That's awesome. Yeah, maintaining equanimity in the midst of the storm is something I'm trying to cultivate as well. And it's not, I'm thinking of it now not as like sort of a destination I achieve or like a box that I tick. It's more of a practice,
Yeah, because I just noticed that like when dysregulated, one, that's intense, and like it's harder to be one's, full best whole self. Right. And be fully here in those moments, and all these other reasons. But it's a lifelong practice, and it comes and goes for me for sure. Yeah.
So I'm thinking now again about this idea of moving toward discomfort. And I really like one of Stutz's tools that he calls, I think I've got it here, the reversal of desire. The purpose is to sort of overcome fear and avoidance and step outside of your comfort zone. So I won't say it exactly the way he does it, but the way I kind of use it with my clients is, picture your comfort zone, this small circle within which all the things that are comfortable for you reside. But maybe on the outside of the circle are things you want to bring into your life, things you want to experience. But between you and them is this mist of darkness. And when you go into that mist, it's scary and painful. And so the reversal of desire means that you look, you know, what you want is obscured by the pain, the mist. You would normally look at that mist and think, no, you'd rebound off of it. It's what constructs the border of your comfort zone. Yeah. So he instead encourages you to think about this mist as not the obstacle, but the way. It is the discomfort that is going to bring into your life.
The obstacle is the path.
Yeah, it gets a little stoicism there. It's going to bring into your life the thing that you want. So he has people go through this exercise of looking at this thing that would normally be uncomfortable and say, I want it. Bring it on. This is what I need. I want this discomfort. And then imagine themselves stepping right into it. So it's a guided imagery exercise, but then you bring that attitude toward the actual thing that you're avoiding. Yeah. And you just shift it. So you reverse the desire. Instead of being averse to it, you want it into your life. And you can cultivate this more generally to where things that are uncomfortable for you, that stand between you and the thing that you want, become something you want and you bring into your life. I think it's just a cool way of thinking about it.
Yeah, I like that one. I was looking at that the other day as well, and it reminded me, to be honest, of Skinnerism, or some would call it Skinner's Law, like a way of using some B.F. Skinner principles around like just how we're wired. Like we like to think we're above and beyond these carrot and stick things as humans, but no, we are actually like human bodies wired in a certain way where we do like to avoid pain and seek pleasure. Like it's, you know, it's just how it is. Everyone to a different degree. There was even, so in this debate that's been going on forever of what's a more powerful motivator, pain or pleasure. Right. Like there was even a Nobel Prize awarded like 20 years ago, Kahneman or something.
Danny Kahneman?
Yeah. About prospect theory was what it was called. Like if you lose $20, that's more painful than if you find it. But I still, and the idea there in terms of motivating oneself and using it, and I know this is a bit of a tangent, but I think it has some relevance, is that you can either like set yourself rewards or set yourself punishment. Like make the pain of not doing something greater, like bet someone a painful amount of money around it. Like, you know, I'm not necessarily recommending gambling as the tool of choice, but you know what I mean? Like those things do work, just like the social expression of a commitment or your new worthy ideal certainly brings it real into the world and into your serotonin circle of friends and makes you more likely to do it. And, but you can also reward yourself with something. Like I'll often do that if I'm doing work breaks, reward myself with a, like a blissful 10 minutes in the hot tub or on a meditation cushion or whatever, like having a sandwich.
A sandwich. Good job, Reid. You get a sandwich.
Yeah. Every hour.
Oh, yeah. No. I remember a long time ago, Tim Ferriss talking about this app or something. I think it was called Stick, STIKK.
Oh yeah.
And it was where you could put in escrow some money that would go to a quote unquote anti-charity if you didn't make good on your goal. So this idea of like, oh, I don't want this uncomfortable thing to happen.
It would go to like Trump.
Yeah, just whatever, like whatever you don't like, right? You'd commit.
It's too soon to talk about politics. I know there was a debate last night.
If you could call it that. Yeah, it's a freaking train wreck, but anyway, good luck, America. But
good luck, America. Here's some tools.
Yeah,
you're gonna need it.
This is apropos. We're definitely gonna need these tools. But yeah, I like the reversal of desire.
Yeah.
There's a lot, like I said at the sort of in the preamble, there's nothing super revolutionary about his tools, and you can find them elsewhere, just like the way he articulates them.
Yeah.
Gratitude is another important tool. I mean, you go on any blog that's talking about mental health, they're going to talk about gratitude. But that's because it works so well. Because it's so important.
Yeah, that's an example of when we talk about like feel your emotions, acknowledge them, like let them rise and fall, at least within reason. Like And the half-life of an emotion might be just a couple minutes. Like, if research is squishy on this, but it's interesting. Like, you could let something rise and fall, and we're not talking about an hour. Like, this can all be done in real time before you can shift to your gratitude journaling, so it doesn't become a bypass, if you will. Yeah.
Right. Yeah, and there's different ways you can use gratitude. You can use gratitude sort of as a break glass in case of emergency, where, you know, you're at least this is the way I've used it in my life. If I'm feeling particularly down, and have the presence of mind enough to sort of interrogate the thoughts that are causing this feeling. I notice, let's say I'm comparing myself to somebody and I'm finding myself wanting and lacking. If I can quickly shift to, well, hang on a second, let's look at all the stuff that you take for granted that is awesome. It doesn't take a long time before I start feeling pretty good.
Yeah.
And then you can
amazing.
use it as a daily practice, as sort of that psychological or mental hygiene we referenced earlier.
Yeah. So when we talk about like gratitude journaling, as an example, I think I like to add to that, like, or just broaden it. So you could start with angry journaling if you need to. Like, I mean, we write sometimes so our heads don't explode.
Right.
And so you get it out there, and it's cathartic, it's clarifying, it's moving things. And, but yeah, there's just such power in landing on gratitude, especially as you're coming out of the muck.
Yeah. Yeah, we've even talked about it as a tool to use in psychedelic-assisted therapy. You know, I've used it and seen it used particularly in sort of the intensity of the come up when you first are sort of on that, depending on the medicine, a steep trajectory. Just the words, yes, thank you, yes, thank you, can really help soften that blast off.
Yeah, that thank you is powerful. Like, thank you for the pain that woke me up. Thank you for the triggers that showed me the path. Thank you for the obstacles so I knew where that mist was that's obscuring my hopes and dreams and my dharma or whatever.
Yeah, and when thinking about gratitude, I often think about the humans in my life that I'm grateful for. And this is another tool we discussed before we hit record, but that is community. Yeah. You know, I'm fortunate enough to have a lovely wife who I've been with for a long time, who I can go to and she'll listen to me while I complain for a while, while I decompress. And I know that she will love me no matter what. You can call me naive, but that's that hypothesis has panned out so far. And just to have and I have many people, I'm so fortunate, have many people in my life who can do that for me. Hold space, as they say, as we say. And so finding somebody who's a good listener who can do that for you is an incredible tool. And then a larger community. You and I went to a desert festival there the weekend, Element 11 here in Utah.
We did.
Yeah.
Whoa.
That was freaking wild. But
how'd we end up there?
I don't know.
That was awesome.
Bit of a last minute decision on my part, but
that was cool.
It was really awesome. One of the things that was awesome about it for me was being in community, being with friends who I love and whose love I felt. And when I was struggling out there, it was so freaking hot. Just like being able to lean on them and then having them lean on me was everything. And I think in our modern age, we've lost a lot of that. We've lost the tribe, we've lost the neighborhood, we've lost the community.
That's what I loved about that event, Element 11, which is, an extension of Burning Man, and it's 10 principles that are like, and it's palpable out there, like not just the radical self-expression, which is awesome.
Yeah, I love it.
But that sense of community, like I wake up one morning and some gal's just walking around with a frying pan of sizzling sausages saying, would you like one? Would you like one? I was like, what is this place?
Oh my gosh.
Yeah. And just like everyone, it just felt like was instantly your friend, or like deep conversations anywhere you want, or like, come over here for some shade. Let's sit down and have a chat.
Yeah. I was wandering around the first night looking for you. And I was kind of lost. And all of a sudden I hear this little voice from some tent. Hey, you look lost. I'm like, yeah, I am lost. Why don't you come over here? I just sat down in there, and just a couple people sat down in their little, underneath their awning. And one of them was like, do you want this light wand? And it was just sort of this rave-like foam stick with LED lights. Like, that's cool. And then she goes, does your friend that you're looking for have a Cybertruck? And I was like, yeah, how'd you know? And she just points behind me and I turn around, there's your truck.
Oh, that's so funny.
Yeah. Very serendipitous.
This sounds like something out of Alice in Wonderland or whatever.
Gosh,
and
yeah.
Did they feed you something and you went down a rabbit hole?
No, that is a place where such a thing could definitely happen though.
Yeah, no, it's, like a sense of community was so refreshing, and it renewed my resolve to just like be a better neighbor and just be aware of, all the humans that are in this together in close proximity that we might not have conversations with or check in with or feel like we can share ourselves and things with, you know?
And, maybe some of you are now just hearing that Reid and I went to Element 11 and you no longer like us. But I will say one of the things I really like, one of the many things about that kind of community and the burner community, and there are plenty of things that people can say that are critical about such communities, but that it's all volunteer, right? As far as I know, like the people that work there are volunteering. I show up at the welcome gate and they've got some interesting, I'll just put it this way, interesting ways to welcome you to these events. And
I got spanked when I walked, when I drove in
with a paddle.
I mean, it was loving. Yeah.
It was a loving. It was consent, right?
Oh,
they asked for like what on level from 0 to 10, what kind of spanking do you want? I had to guess because I'm not necessarily into that kink too far, and I got a thorough spanking.
I know, who knew? I thought it was a scale of 10 when I said 5, not a scale of 5. No.
Who knew a 5 would leave a mark? Yeah,
no.
it was pretty impressive.
I didn't get injured from this consensual, clothed, funny little welcome wagon.
Yeah.
Wow.
But yeah, it was just cool to see that there. And on my way out at the end of the festival, the person that was sort of waving by to me is, "Hey, next time, this is your first time? Yeah, next time you come, volunteer." I'm like, yes, I think I'm going to.
There's even a sanctuary there where you can go for support.
Yeah.
And they're roaming around checking in with people, bringing water and things.
We saw
it's really cool.
That was awesome.
Yeah. Yeah, so...
community.
That's our plug.
Come to Element 11. It's pretty awesome. Other things, other tools. We talked about top-down. We sort of skimmed across it. There's great ways to use your mind to help the mind. We've talked about a few different cognitive restructuring tools on the show before, but I mentioned a couple times interrogating, so-called interrogating unhelpful thoughts with loving awareness. But asking yourself if you're having a particularly critical thought, is it true? What is the evidence for? Who would you be or what might you do if this thought were not true? Try that on for size, see how that goes. How might you feel? Helpful reminders, like you said, about emotions, like this too shall pass. Asking yourself before you take any drastic action, are you hungry? Are you fatigued? Are you not well slept? Are you lonely, right? You might think that you're the worst person in the world, or you might just be really hungry.
Yeah. Yeah. Sometimes I do need to remind myself of that. Like I remember getting a little bit, noticing some inner critic coming on board about just being forgetful or distracted on a certain day. And I was like, oh yeah. Sleep would help as a prerequisite, or just the reminder that yes, we can and probably do behave like a cranky, sleep-deprived baby who wants a nap if we have not slept.
Yeah, Yeah, and it speaks to sort of the expectations that we have for ourselves. I'll be, toward the end of the day, finding myself not on my A game, a little fatigued, and be like, "Come on, man, what's wrong with you?" And lovingly reminding myself, maybe nothing's wrong with you. Maybe you're just a human being and you need sleep. You need rest. You need to take a nap. You need to take a walk.
Yeah, I like how you've talked about on here the fuel we burn, the clean versus dirty. But I just think about fuel at this point in my life. Am I in midlife, Steve? Is this a midlife crisis?
I think we might be, yeah.
So, which is interestingly a time when you really need some tools like all your repressed emotions, whatever, it catches up to you and you get to decide if you're going to do some spring cleaning or whatever. And that can look like a mess at first, then you move through it. But I think I don't even know where I was going. So I'm just not going to criticize myself and just say, I forgot my point of all this, Steve. But
what an excellent example of self-compassion.
Yeah,
Good
I'm just going to
job, Reid.
embrace it. I'm forgetful today.
Maybe you need some sleep.
Yeah, I mean, okay. So after our experience in the desert, with heat,
Yeah, it
right?
was so hot.
I remember, I think I was
Dusty.
telling you about this weird use of a tool that I tried out there where I didn't even think about it, that a tent could get super duper hot if it's just out there in the sun. Apparently I'm not camping enough in the sunshine.
Haven't done
these
enough
days.
desert camping. Yeah.
I have not, even though I love a good Edward Abbey book, right? Like Desert Solitaire. But so one afternoon, I just was starting to feel extra sweaty and caked with sunscreen, and realizing there was nowhere to hide from this at 3 p.m. in the afternoon when I don't even know, 90 to 100 degrees. And I go into my tent. I was like, oh, that's probably 89 degrees in there. What do I do? Just like keep shifting this lawn chair around until I find patches of shade. But then I was like, I'm going to try something. I'm going to turn my tent into a sweat lodge and go in there and just like move toward the heat and do some intense breathing, a little bit of yoga, just sweat my ass off. And then I was pleasantly shocked of how good I felt coming out of there. I was like, wow, I just grabbed that, uncomfortable moment by the horns. And, I think it worked out, thankfully.
Yeah. I remember when you told me about that, and I was like, holy crap.
Why? You could have died.
Yeah, why? Why don't you just, break into somebody's RV and get some AC? But no, I was super impressed with the even the thought to use such a tool, but and then the willingness to engage it, and then the payoff. It's pretty awesome.
It was near death. What else was I gonna do?
The last straw.
No, but then so I come home. I had another brief trip this week to Kentucky, of all places. I went to give a talk, and so I'd taken 2 planes one day, 2 planes on another day. I come home, and my air conditioner is out upstairs and my home was like 85, 87. And I was like, oh no, why?
The heat is back.
Yeah. But, anyway, so I, thank you for the triggers. Show us our vulnerabilities in our work, but, so I got it fixed.
Understandable that, your train of thought and memory might not be perfect today.
Yeah.
Given the 10 days you've just had.
So I'll just make excuses for, no, I'm embracing it. I think it's funny.
Yeah.
And I do try to, I had a therapist once, and I've shared this before, but who told me something that I'll never forget because it was so useful for me as a people-pleasing drama avoider or having that narrative. I was probably triggering the drama by, thinking I'm avoiding it and maybe secretly, subconsciously wanting it. I don't know. But she said, just get out the popcorn and watch the drama. It was just like this flip of like, life is this beautiful play. And it's okay if it has spicy moments or dramatic moments. And, you've got to hold your integrity and your your path, your values through it. But yeah, you can enjoy it, you can gamify it, and the more we can bring joy to the stormy moments, the better.
Yeah, beautiful. It's a great example of the acceptance part of acceptance and commitment therapy that we were talking about before. Saying yes to life. Any other tools? I mean, we certainly covered every single possible tool that there is. One, I guess, just popped in my mind that I like. It's the cosmic perspective tool, sort of zooming out.
Phil Stutz, if you're listening, come on our podcast.
Yeah, that'd be
That's
cool.
one of his, right?
On. I don't know. It might be. I just maybe I forget.
Maybe not.
I forget. But I remember when I was younger, my older brother told me to do this. He saw this Google Earth view of a neighborhood, and then it would just zoom out.
Like pale blue dot.
Yeah.
I'll put on Carl Sagan when I need a kick in the psyche pants.
Kick in the spiky pants. Yeah, so it puts my gripes, my complaints, my limited perspective into a greater perspective. It's hard to get wrapped around the axle about, your fast food not coming fast enough when you realize you are one of 8 billion people on this wet rock floating through the infinite vacuum of space.
Yeah, you got to find what snaps your perspective back into place, right? And it might be a favorite teacher or guru or mantra or quote or nature walk or whatever your reboot is. But I've just noticed that has been immensely valuable. If I can find, quick paths back to my higher self with a broader perspective, rather than getting stuck in the suffering.
Yeah. You mentioned nature quickly. I think, we're never not in nature, right? I mean, you can't escape it. We are nature, if you want to go that far.
Podcasting from nature right now.
We're in nature. Half the plants in here are fake. No.
Hey, only one is fake in my office here, Steve. They're the flowers.
The flowers. Yeah. But yeah, so like for me, I just notice my nervous system relaxes when I'm out in the trees, out in the mountains. Not so much in the 400-degree desert, I will admit, but
how about around fake plants?
Yeah. So being in the wilderness, it helps me realize that maybe I've got this low-grade anxiety, this sympathetic nervous system tone, being in a sheetrock box for most of my time in sort of a city in the suburb.
Give it to the earth.
Go out there and give it to the earth, be in the earth.
Barefoot.
There's something to that, right? Intimate connection with the dirt and the water and the foliage.
Yeah. It's, it's hard to keep your perspective small if you're staring out at the majesty of nature. Or, speaking of the Element 11 experience, I think we both will never forget and always cherish the moment of that night of the fireworks when...
And the drone shows.
Yeah, everyone's waiting for this, fire and drone and fireworks show to start. And the full moon that day, the actual full moon, starts rising as 2,000 people are like radically self-expressing and hanging out as community in a desert. And then the moon starts peeking above the mountains in the horizon. And people were howling at it, cheering it on, and it just came up right there.
I felt like I was transported back in time 10,000 years. Just like being a hunter-gatherer, not like, having reverence for this celestial body. Yeah. Plus, it was like orange, and it was rising slowly. It was crazy. Such a cool experience. Such a great connection with nature and perspective granting, like we're talking about.
And that drone show.
That was drone wild. Show was something else.
Yeah, who knew?
I wish that more fireworks shows were replaced by drone shows. That thing was awesome. And to music, which reminds me of another tool, music.
Yeah.
Incredible tool.
Yeah, we're talking about state shifting here. Right. Like there are tools to shift one state in the moment, and there are tools that are more focused on traits and focused on kind of chronic issues. But I think we've focused the discussion here on, what are those little flips we can do to lovingly, gently shift our mental state when it's kind of stuck in a rut.
Yeah. So as is typical of our conversations, we kind of did a grab bag, things here and there, some top of mind, some a little redundant with previous episodes, but what the hell? It's our show. Hopefully, hopefully it's as useful and enjoyable.
I've enjoyed it.
I certainly have. It's a good reminder for me. I mean, selfishly, not half, but some portion of the reason that we do this show is because it, at least I'll speak for myself, it prompts me to look closely at things that maybe I've fallen out of practice with and do a refresher for myself. So thank you for listening, folks. Hopefully it was useful.
Thanks, Steve.
Psychedelic Therapy Frontiers is brought to you by Numinus, a mental wellness company committed to tackling the global mental health crisis by delivering best-in-class psychedelic-assisted therapies, contributing to the body of primary and clinical psychedelic research, and fostering healing through community connection and social responsibility. You can learn more about Numinus at numinus.com. That's Numinus.com. If you enjoyed the show today and you want to support us, here's how you do it. Rate and review the show on platforms like Apple Podcasts and Spotify. Subscribe to the Numinus YouTube channel, like the videos, and share it. Share the show or clips of the show with someone that you think will enjoy it. The content of this podcast does not constitute medical advice or mental health treatment. Consult with a medical or mental health professional if you believe you are in need of mental health treatment.